Tales from the streets.
All right. Chief, I appreciate you joining us today.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
I'll give you your formal chief, Robert MacKenzie of Kennebunk Police Department in Maine.
Yes.
Well, I'll do my best to call you Bob. I'll probably call you Chief, like I said a dozen times, but I really appreciate your time. And you're the first kind of, I guess, head of a department that we've had on. So I'm interested to pick your brain and dig into some of the issues that encompass running an agency and just law enforcement in general.
Sure thing.
Perfect. Well, to get started, just kind of how we do things on here is just a synopsis of how you grew up and like what kind of led you down the path into law enforcement.
Awesome. Certainly. So, I've been in law enforcement now for 37 years, police chief for the past 17 years. Funny thing about it, I never thought about being a police officer. Okay. Nonetheless, did I ever want to be chief once I started in law enforcement? It was like, yeah, no, I love the road. You know, that's where I love. But you folks may be old enough to remember, well, maybe not, a show back in the 70s, Emergency, Johnny Gage, Roy DeSoto.
Yes.
2 LA County paramedics. Those guys were my idols. Seriously, they're probably what put me on the trajectory of where I am today. I give them a lot of credit because back in the day, you know, I wasn't too much of a hellion, but I was a little bit, and I could have gone either way. Single parent household. I really could have strayed either way, but I wanted to be a paramedic, a firefighter. So at the age of 14, I started with our fire department here in Kennebunk as a junior fireman. And at the age of 16, I took an EMT class, which was unusual back in those days for somebody my age to take an EMT class. And the other thing that was unusual is I actually did really well at it because in high school or school in general, I didn't do all that well. I was not a good student. I think I had ADHD and I tried to pay attention in school. You know, first week I'd sit in the front of the class. By the end of the week, I'm sitting in the back shooting spitballs. You know, that was me growing up. I'm surprised that I graduated from high school. But when I took the EMT class, I did really well. I excelled at it and I loved it. And I couldn't get on our rescue here in Kennebunk until I was 18 because of insurance. But yeah, at 18, I got on our rescue and I joined a neighboring volunteer fire department also. And then I think I was 19 is when I was hired as a full-time firefighter medic for the city of Biddeford. And I worked there for 3.5 years, became an advanced ALS EMT. Critical care level. And I'll never forget the day because one of my partners actually on the fire department was a reserve police officer here in Kennebunk. And he came to me and said, "Hey, Bob," he says, you interested in becoming a police officer? Bob, because reserve, he says, "They're looking for people." And I thought, that sounds like fun. You're born and raised in Kennebunk, and yeah, why not? So I came in and applied to be a reserve. They hired me. Times are different back then, okay? I'm going back like 38 years. Because they hired me, they gave me 24 hours of training, and I was in a car stopping cars. I had no clue what I was doing. I had no formal law enforcement training. Okay, so learning on the job, very different from certainly from today's standards. But a year went by and a full-time position came up, and I thought to myself, you know, do I want to do this full-time, leave fire service and go to law enforcement? And I thought maybe there'll be more room for advancement in law enforcement than the firefighting. Now, I love firefighting. I love being in the rescue. I love having that responsibility, but I didn't like downtime. And in the fire services, there can be a lot of downtime.
Yeah.
I like to be active, right? So I did make the decision and left. It's been fun. I still love my job. I love coming to work. And that's why, obviously, I'm still here. Our department was very different back then. We've been through, a number of chiefs in that years that I was here. And things, again, weren't so great when I started here. There was people here that probably shouldn't have been in law enforcement, okay?
Can you elaborate a little bit? Because I know what you mean, but not necessarily criminals, I'm hoping, but just in your own words.
No, absolutely. I think at that time, the chief hired people that he knew would support him. Okay, that may not have chances other places because once you hire them, you give them that chance, they're going to be, dedicated to you, right? Yeah. So I didn't agree with some of the things that were going on back then. I might have had cases disappear, which I did not certainly agree with. Times I wondered why I stayed here, but you know what? This was my hometown. And I remember specifically thinking, you know what? Maybe there'll be a day when I can be in a position that I can change something. not thinking to be chief, but
Yeah.
that I'd have at least influence on how things go here. So I did stick it out because of the dedication that I had for the community that I grew up in. Let's say several years went through. I was able to do a lot. At one point, I had a canine. I was a DRE. I had a lot of opportunity here, but I didn't fit the mold for the first several years here, right? I was doing my job. I remember, working midnight shifts and the chief coming in the morning. I could hear his heels clicking down the hallway. Say, all right, MacKenzie, who'd you
Yeah.
fuck with last night?
Really, like that?
With the little people. And I was
Wow.
just
Okay.
doing my job. In fact, I'll never forget this. We had an arrest warrant issued for this local woman in town. I got the warrant. I went to her house. I knew this woman, and she lived in this little trailer. And I go up, and she was there. And I asked her to step outside. There were some other adults there too, but some kids that were there. And so I told her, I said, let's step outside and let me talk to you about it. So I told her what the deal was, let her tell the other adults there that I was going to have to take her back to the station. So I lead her out to the car and placed her in custody, handcuffed her, put her in the back seat, get her back to the station. And I think I ended up had to transport her to the York County jail. And a couple of days later, I was home and I get called at home. They said, you need to come in and see the chief. I'm like, okay. So I got my car, I came down, brought me in his office with the captain. He said, MacKenzie, did you arrest such and such? I said, yeah. He says, what for? I said, it's an arrest warrant. She said, did you handcuff her? I said, yeah. He says, why'd you do that? I'm like, policy?
Yeah.
He said, MacKenzie, use your fucking head. She's a female. She's not going to hurt you.
That ain't true.
I'm like, I just said, okay. So I got let out of there by the captain, and the captain told me, he says, you didn't do anything wrong. You keep doing what you're doing. He says, and I'll support you if this ever happens again. Like,
Wow.
okay. And then as time went on, he had hired another gentleman here who he was very proactive. And he had some of his stuff, I'd say, disappear. And he talked to me about it, and he started taking notes.
Oh, wow.
So he was keeping me kind of abreast of what he was doing, and he ended up calling the media.
Really?
And now our chief was very authoritarian, right? He led by media came snooping around, and I remember the day the lieutenant, it was a day shift, lieutenant called me and says, you need to meet me at this location down near our beaches. I'm like, okay. So he pulled up beside me. He said, I don't know who did it, but somebody called the media, friend snooping around. He says, the chief is pissed. He says, I wouldn't want to be that person. Okay, now I kind of knew what was going on.
Yeah.
I was confiding in me what he was doing, but I just didn't say anything. And so the media kept coming in, asking questions, wanted to see reports, stats, you name it, because the information he was getting that the chief was taking care of his people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So once again, I was home and I get a call to come in and see the chief. Came down, took me to his office, and he reamed me out. And he says, MacKenzie, if I find out it's you that called the media, your career is fucked. You'll never work again as a law enforcement officer. You're done. You're finished. And
How long ago was this? Sorry,
oh
I'm just
God.
I mean,
Whew.
earlier you said 37 years, so a couple
This is
years
probably-
on, or
This was probably in the early 90s.
wow. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's just wild. I mean, I can see it happening, but that's crazy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you. Apologies.
So I told him, I said, hey, I had nothing to do with it. And then I left his office. I went upstairs to the town manager, who was his boss. And I told him, I said, that guy just threatened me. I'm not putting up for that. And I said, this is not right.
Good.
And he says, you have nothing to be concerned about. You let me know if he says anything to you again. I'm like, okay. So I go home. And, I was a little nervous, obviously. And everybody here at the PD was very stressed out. It's not good when you have, media here. I was hurting inside because I knew this was not a good look for our police department. At the same time, I knew something had to be done. We needed to change something.
Yeah.
So I'm going to fast forward probably 3 days, and I get another call from the PD. You got to come down and see the chief. Here we go. So I come down, and the chief started telling me how he always thought of me as a son, apologized to me, literally started to tear up. I'm like, where is this coming from? This is bizarre.
Yeah.
Shook my hand. I left. I go home. Within 2 hours, our union steward called me, who was a friend of mine. Carl. Love Carl. Hey, Bob, listen, he says, union's taking a vote, a support for the chief. Would you be willing to sign the letter? I said, what? And I went off on him. I said, that son of a bitch called me down there, kissed my ass, So I would sign that letter, and I said, fuck him. I'm not signing
Yeah.
it. And I knew if this guy survived, I'm done. I'm toast.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I can't sign that letter in good faith. I cannot look at myself in the mirror. I'm not signing it. I was the only one
Wow.
here that didn't sign it.
Oh, wow.
I was scared to death.
Yeah.
So weeks and weeks went by. Investigations came forward. Probably within a month or two, he was out on leave, and then they ended up looking to terminate him. And they had a huge hearing down at town hall with our select board, who was our former government. And we had 5 select board members at the time, and so it was going to be a vote. Obviously, then we needed 3 votes, and back then we only had pagers. We didn't have cell phones, and I remember letting dispatch know. I'm like, please, I said, when you find out what happened, text me, because I'm thinking I gotta look for another job if he survives.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, it was 3-2.
Quick question: at this time frame, what was your rank?
I was patrol officer.
Okay.
Yeah. And they voted 3-2 and to terminate him. Of course, he fought it, but they worked out a deal. He did leave. It was kind of like that song, Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead, right? Kind of like, oh my God, all of us can take a breath now. Now, the guy that brought all this forward, he got terminated. He was terminated by that chief while he could, and apparently there was something on the application he may have not been truthful about, some prior military issue. So that's how they used it. So he was terminated. But that whole thing really put me in a position of, for the officers here, they respected what I did because they were afraid. And I get that.
Yeah.
But I couldn't, I had to do the right thing. Well, that's what it was about. So I'm glad I did what I did. I did talk to reporters, some of that I knew on the side. They wanted me to go on camera. I said, I won't go on camera, but I'll give you information.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, can we just hold on that? Because this is something that, civilian citizens, I don't think they understand how hard it is to do what you're talking about, because they're just like, oh, there's something fucked up's going on. There's corruption. Why don't more people speak out? Like, it's the right thing to do. It's like, you don't understand. Like, this is your world. This is your life. This is your career.
Yeah.
This is how you feed your family. You got kids at home. And again, for something like what you're talking about is egregious, making cases disappear for your friends from a position of authority. It's wild. It's wild.
Right.
But when you're a patrolman early in your career, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going against the chief, because if you swing and you miss, it's that thing. You go for the king. You better not miss. Your career is done. And especially in a state like Maine, chiefs and sheriffs, they have they can screw you.
Oh,
and you can't get hired anywhere. And you've done all of this work, and now you're toast. So for me, I'm listening to you tell it, and I'm like, wow, that's early in your career. And well, I mean, you stuck with it for 37 years, but yeah, anyway, I couldn't imagine having to go through that. And then, also the recovery, right? Because now that is kind of like you said, it's an embarrassment for your department, and you're having to come out of it. So I just wanted to touch on that. Mo, do you got anything?
Yeah, I was just, like you were saying, I think the word that kept popping in my head is it is humbling to hear this story from you, because more often than not, people would go, I can't. Yeah. I got too much at stake, and it's very humbling to hear, though, that this is what people who do this job should look like. So
I appreciate that. It's doing the right thing, right? And Chief had surrounded himself with people of influence. Like, he used to go out with the select board members. He knew what he was doing. It's bread and butter, right? They were the hiring, the folks that would make the ultimate decisions. So he was very confident in himself with everything that he did here, right or wrong. So it played out as it should have, and we became better because of it. At the time, it was our lieutenant that ended up getting the chief's position, and I have a lot of respect for him. He was a great guy, very much in the community policing, just was good for the people here. He stepped into that role as chief and made it about 1.5 years. Very different climate back then. I talk about the select board members, again, our governing body here for the town, but at that time, they would come into the station and meet with him one-on-one, and they didn't love him. And so he had a lot of pressure on him. And I think they didn't love him because of the connections with the prior chief. And so this chief ended up leaving. He retired himself after 1.5 years, which was too bad for me, because I did have a lot of respect for that guy, and I loved what he was all about, community policing. And then there was another internal they did bring in that was here for for a number of years before he went off. I did get promoted under his watch as a sergeant and then detective sergeant. And I'll go back, again, I never saw myself as, being a leader. I think everything that I had been through, though, and then wanting to see things change here, changing the culture, professionalizing our department more is why I definitely did step up to become a patrol sergeant. And I'll say that's one of the best jobs that I had here. Loved working the shifts and working with the team. I used to work midnights. I love midnights here. I'd love to be the first one out of the station, first one making a traffic stop, first one making an arrest, leading by example, leading from the front, right? Good times, good people, and loved it. And I became a lieutenant. We had another little shakeup here. The command staff at the time was not getting along, so they weren't talking to each other. And that command staff was chief, captain, and lieutenant, and they didn't get along, and there was no communication between the three of them. So it's essentially myself and another sergeant. That sounds odd, but I want to say we were really running the department. People were coming to us. We were keeping the ship afloat, and we wanted to. And then we had the town hired a consultant to come in, and he moved things along. He was a change agent, and that chief went on and did get another job, and the other two ended up leaving. So the other two command staff folks. And so that consultant, who was a prior chief out of Connecticut, actually was then hired to become the interim director of police services. He was not a sworn officer at the time, so he was the director of police services. I was a lieutenant, and we hired another lieutenant, and did it for a year and a half. And when they're going to hire a chief, I said, I'd like to throw my hat in the ring. I will say,
lieutenant?
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't meet the minimum standards. As far as I should say, the desired qualifications was to have a bachelor's degree. I told you I wasn't good in school, right?
You did that. Yep.
As a
You
patrol
touched on it. I didn't want to dive on that, but go ahead.
As a patrol officer, I started thinking I probably want to look towards getting a degree. So I did go to a community college, and I was working my way through. I had enough credits for associates, but I didn't get my associates there. I transferred to start on my 4-year. So I didn't meet the desired qualifications. There was a lot of people, this is a good place that people want to come to. It's a beautiful community. We have our beaches here, it's a lot of interest. So a lot of people apply to be chief. When I threw my hat in the ring, I didn't know if I was going to get an interview. I was the only one from within that applied, and they did give me an interview. And I'd be honest with you, I thought it was a kind of we'll give you an interview for the experience, right?
Just do you a favor. Yeah, I got you.
Right. That's how I felt. But I remember the admin for the town manager called me and said, they're setting up the interviews. Because I'm an internal, I had my pick of time slots. What did I want for a time slot over 2 days? And I said, you know what? Give me the last interview. I want the last. So, okay. And I was with my wife. We were at a local market here, and I happened to run into the select board chair, who I knew for many years. And he sees me. Hey, Bob, how you doing? I'm like, good. How you doing? He said, good. He says, hey, did you apply to be for the chief's role? I said, yeah, I applied. He went, well, that's good. He said, I don't think you're ready yet. He says, I think in time. You see, well, and I'm like, I'm thinking in my head, I can't believe he just said this to me.
Right to your face.
Right. But it's like, whatever. Maybe that gave me a little bit extra gusto, right? So I left, and within a week or two, we had our interviews. And I will say, after the interview that I had, it was a Friday afternoon, I walked out of there, and I remember walking in the stairwell, and I said, I knocked it out of the park. I had answer for everything. I was spot on. I felt really good about it. And of course, as days goes on, you don't hear anything. I'm starting to second guess myself. I'm like, maybe I wasn't as good as I thought I was. But the town manager asked me to meet him off site with the interim chief. And I did that, and they started just going down this road. There was a bunch of bulls saying about this complaint. That was a ruse to get me there. But then they said, no, you're really here because we want to offer you the job. I was all blown away.
Awesome.
What was cool is I knew there was a sitting chief out of California. It was a department similar size as ours, but it was very affluent. And he came out. They paid for him to come out here. They set him up at an inn, and then he did his homework here. He was out talking to business members. He met with the union. He did all the right things.
Yeah.
And of course, this word got back to me, and I was like, oh, all right. I'm whatever. I didn't have high hopes. I didn't think they were going to hire me. So once I got the nod, I felt really good about it. And they told me that, we had an interview panel of 12 people. It was a lot of people. And they said, when I walked out of it, they said it was 12 all in favor. And that was the only one. It was like awesome. And it's been history ever since. I loved my job, I will say, but the first 4 years were hell for me here. I went through a lot, as you can imagine. It still had to be a lot of change.
Yeah.
But I had some issues. I mean, right away, one of my interview questions came to fruition. And that question was, what if you had one of your command staff who was a friend that did a violation that was egregious? How would you handle that? Anything else?
You have to.
And that happened.
That's rough.
I can't get into specifics on that, but I ended up moving to termination. It was painful for me because this guy was a friend.
Yeah.
I had a lot of respect for him. He was a great officer, but I just couldn't get by that, and I had to move to termination.
Bob, let me jump in real quick. You're getting into where I want to go, and I appreciate it. We're going to go back a little bit and then work our way forward. But
sure thing.
Was anyone in your family? Because 17, you're like, I want to be a firefighter. You already had that mentality to be a first responder. Did that come from parents, family, somewhere else? Or where did that drive come from?
First responder was, honestly, it was Johnny Gage, Roy DeSoto. Those guys were, they kept me on that straight and narrow track. And I knew if I wanted to be like them, I had to do the right thing.
Okay.
And so that's what did it. Now, I had nobody in my family that was any first responder, but like I had a best friend growing up through school. His father was a police chief here in Kennebunk for years, old school chief, and really, really great guy. I have a picture of him on my windowsill right here behind me. And so I used to stay overnight at their house. They take me on vacation with them. So he's somebody certainly I looked up to, but never did it occur to me about becoming a police officer because of him. He passed away several years ago, but his wife just recently passed, and I went to that, and the family was telling me how much his wife had really was so proud of me and what I had done, kind of say following in his footsteps here.
Yeah.
My mother knew him. It was just everybody knew him in town. He was a great leader, and people loved him. But that was really the only influence that I had to get into.
I'm interested because again, we've had one firefighter on. We've got a couple more slated because they're still first responders, and we bust each other's balls and stuff. Cops and firefighters, we always do that, but we work together a lot. But it is almost like two different mindsets, in my opinion. But here you are sitting in front of me saying, "Well, no, I was going to do this, but then I took a different path and thought, for your own reasons."
Yep.
To me, that's very unique. Just from my perspective, having talked to firefighters that I've known that's their career.
Sure.
So just that first responder mentality. And then back, so when you started, because when I was a trooper in Maine, I don't know if it's always been this way, but they had the one academy up in Augusta. Was it like that when you went through as well?
Yeah, I went to it was the Waterville, Silver Street.
Oh, okay. So the old one. Okay.
Yeah. So the old one. And
the really old one. I mean, the one I went to was old too, but
you got it.
Yeah.
So then they moved to Vassalboro, but still only one academy for the whole state of Maine.
I still think that's a great idea because Mo started before I did, but in Hillsborough, it's almost like every county has their own. I don't know if that's completely accurate, but for the most part, Hillsborough did. So, everyone has their own academy, their own FTO, their own, FTOs did something, but it's very separated, I guess, the way it is. And I thought my experience with the Maine State Police, you got to meet cops from all over the state and train together. So you had those connections coming out of training.
Sure.
Whereas when you're on the road, you're like, even within Hillsborough, like you had Tampa, you had Tarpon Springs, not Polk County. I can't remember. There's another one. I'm drawing a blank. But anyway, there's smaller agencies within the county. You just kind of created those connections over time as opposed to having them right out of training. Anyway, I still think it probably doesn't work for every state, but I still think it's an excellent way to do it. And then one more thing. So then you went from patrol to sergeant to lieutenant. Was there any type of leadership training, or was it just, hey, today I'm a patrolman, tomorrow I'm a sergeant, or what did that aspect look like?
Yeah, certainly. So when I became a patrol sergeant, there was a leadership class for us to attend. It used to be at St. Anselm's College, which is in New Hampshire. It was an amazing setting. The food was phenomenal there. Everybody said that before
Good.
that I went, how amazing it was. And when I became sergeant and they sent me the training, they moved it from there to Brockton, Massachusetts, which
I just talked about Brockton a couple shows ago. You met all the Cape Verdeans there.
the first day of class, and when we have the command staff from Brockton PD there telling us, a room full of cops, the supervisors, saying, when you leave here, probably not good to be walking on the streets after dark.
Correct.
And I saw why, because I had then drive to my hotel room, and there was like gangbangers on the corners. Right? It's like, holy cow, it's a different world down here, right?
Wow.
Yes, it is.
The training itself was phenomenal. It's a 2-week supervisor training, and it was great. The Academy also here in Maine had training as well. So I always elected to go as much training as I can to better myself. So yeah, that's what thrusted me into, become, I say, confident, still feeling uncomfortable, but then you have your people that you looked up to. There was a guy here that was a sergeant, had been a sergeant for a number of years. I have a lot of respect for it. Did a great job as a good leader of people, but I learned what to do and what not to do from him, from his experiences. He was a little old school. So I took, from both sides there on how that worked and from others, but I thoroughly enjoyed that role. As I said before, probably my best job here was that patrol supervisor role. And then going into CID, I'm not one that's going to say I was a great evidence guy or stuff like that, but I did enjoy the investigation portion of that and getting into the weeds, and that was fun. And then the lieutenant, thrusting in the lieutenant's position, which is quite a bit different than, obviously, you're not a road person anymore. You're in the office. And I never saw myself as sitting in an office. I tell people now I drive a computer, but I also, in my mind, I said, if I want to see the change that I always wanted to see here, I need to be in these roles to be able to affect that change. And so it was a great opportunity. I will say during that tenure here, when I was a lieutenant, George W. Bush was in office.
Yeah, I was going to touch on that because that's how we met. But
sure, that I will say that came with a lot of stress, because when you're meeting with the Secret Service and then I get pushed, I'm in the position now where I'm going to do the detail route through Kennebunk from Sanford to the port is a long stretch. It's a long stretch. And so I was the guy in charge of setting up these motorcade routes as far as the security of these routes. Talk about stress. And I used to get so stressed because he'd come quite a bit. And when they tell me, I'd instantly get pissed off at first. Oh my God, here we go. But then I said, you know what? How many people get to do this for a president? This is pretty neat. So I took on a totally different attitude about it. There was one day when they changed the routes all the time, right? Because they didn't want the same route. And they had done this route, and it was quite a long route. We went through it. It went great. And about an hour and a half later, I'm at home, and Mike Migalski, who was head of the presidential detail down there at Walker's Point, he calls me up. He says, "Hey, Bob, it's Mike Migalski, Secret Service." He says, "Just want to let you know." He says, "Your route." He says, "We did not meet one car anywhere." He says, "It was phenomenal." He says, "How'd you like to come down and meet the president and get a tour?" I'm like, "Okay." So,
absolutely.
They brought me down, got to meet the president, family, or Walker's Point, pictures and all that stuff. That was really, really cool. Even on H.W. Bush, I was a patrol officer at the time when he was in office, and seeing what I saw, I got to be there when Putin was coming in, the helicopter landing in Kennebunk Port and setting up, part of that detail. The people seeing it, working with all the Secret Service agents, working at the checkpoints, it was amazing, experiences that I'll just never forget. And again, I say, how many departments get to do something like this, be involved in that. So really
sorry, just so you understand, Kitty, well, and actually, Bob, I'm sorry. How many residents, like year long? Because I know it swells in the summertime, but how many residents are in Kennebunk Port?
So Kennebunk Port, 2 separate municipalities. Kennebunk Port has about 4,000 year-round residents. Kennebunk has 12,000 year-round residents, but in the summertime we swell. I've heard 40,000, 50,000. There's a lot of people here. The people are coming in from away for vacation, right? It's a great vacation destination spot for people to come. So what comes with that is not a lot of crime, but it's just a lot of cars, people, I will say COVID kind of took care of the issues that we used to have with some of the local establishments around here, because come 1 o'clock, everybody's leaving those establishments, and that's when we have issues. They close early now. Maybe that's a national thing. Because of COVID, I guess what they saw was they don't need to put up with the headaches, and so they do close pretty early. But it's just a lot of people around, but it's for the most part good people. And of course, our department, we have 27 full-time officers. We only hire non-sworn community service officers for the summertime. That's essentially what they do, is work at our beaches, parking tickets, information, and we only hire, half a dozen of those folks to help supplement us. So does it get busier for us in the summer? Absolutely. Come Labor Day, we're like, oh, thank God. But we always like to see it come. It's a change.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it changes it up. But imagine that, Mo. So, I obviously joined the Secret Service when Trump was elected. So after both Bushes, clearly. But imagine this town, small town, well, relatively small town. And then now you have presidential visits, which that's a whole mess of things. You're dealing with the Coast Guard. I mean, in the waters because Maine and Kennebunk is a big fishing area as well. And they're locking down all these venues. There's not that many roads. It's not really built up to be like a New York or a Boston, or something like that. But then in the summertime, so when I joined the Bushes 43, he would vacation in Kennebunk for the entire summer, which it's a smaller detail when you're not actually president. But now it's this swell of people, and the Secret Service, we're trying to move our protectees around. And so we ended up working very closely with Kennebunk and Kennebunk Port. And I did make that mistake. One time I called the Kennebunk Port chief, the chief of Kennebunk PD, because I was very new, and I was immediately corrected. And it is two separate towns and municipalities. I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. It was embarrassing. And then you're dealing also with the swell of people from Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, and Canada. Yes. Maine is Canada's Florida. So you got all these pasty white people with Speedos and stuff running around. Tell me I'm wrong, Bob. Tell me I'm wrong.
You're spot on.
It's a very unique experience. And then like what Bob was, again, this was before my time, but when Putin came, like now you're dealing with Russian Secret Service for all, I mean, like it's just the scope of what you would deal with. I tried to remind myself, because I came from a street cop before I went to the Secret Service. So I'd be traveling all over the world and stuff. And I always wanted to talk to the local cops. And it's funny because on the Secret Service side, you can tend to kind of just take things for granted, but it's one, it's a big deal. Two, it's a big fucking pain in the ass. And I can only imagine the Secret Service loves to roll in, take up all the resources, say, thank you, and then pop smoke. And then the chief has got to deal with like, I had to sit in traffic for 5 hours, and they towed my car. And we're like, yeah, hey, thanks guys. It was fun. We're out.
Absolutely.
And what's funny is when he brought up the stress of it, I was never in Secret Service, but when I was at Hillsborough, I was a liaison for Secret Service during the time when the president would come here. It was chaos, and they would assign me a lot of times to help. Well, I remember one time being assigned to, like, the president was working a crowd, and I was supposed to move as an undercover through the crowd with him. And I'm thinking, what happens if something happens?
Yeah, chaos ensues. That's what happens.
Right. Yeah. But what an experience, I remember, again, I think I was a sergeant working days at the time, and I had to go down to one of the local pizza places in Lower Village, which was close to the Kennebunk Port, to pick up pizza for my dispatch. So it wasn't long after HW had got out of office. I think it was that following summer. And I walk into the pizza place, and there's George H.W. Bush standing there in the pizza place. Yeah. Nobody else in there. I'm like, oh my God. He's like, hey, how are you? Shakes my hand and thanks me for my service. And I'm like, oh, wow. I said, no, thank you for your service. And he's like, so what kind of pizza did you get? He didn't get broccoli. Did you? I don't like broccoli. Very personable guy.
Awesome.
He loved people, and he loved getting out. My wife and I would go to a local Thai restaurant here in town, and literally they were there a lot. We'd sit down, and diagonally from us is HW and Barbara and a couple other family members. That was in other inns my wife and I would go to, to watch some music or something. They were there. They would get out, have pictures with them a lot. It's pretty neat. And then, he gets out, not as much as his father did, but he is here all the entire summer. But that's definitely has added a different element, and the memories that I have, the pictures that I have with those folks, really, really cool stuff.
That's good law enforcement experience, I will say, for those of us who didn't work at Secret Service.
Well, no,
right?
I like to tie it all in because again,
Yeah,
Secret Service, a lot of guys nowadays are not from law enforcement or whatever, and they just have these assumptions. And I'm like, dude, you don't know where you are. You know, Maine has like maybe 1,000 cops, period, in the entire state, and that might be low, but like these aren't New York and Boston where they can just pull from 3,000 cops to do this. It's like it doesn't work that way. You're just sitting here, as I have been told many times by people in my life, you say things, you don't understand how much work you just put on somebody. I was
right.
like, oh, I didn't know.
Absolutely.
I have a tendency to do that. I'm sorry, that's a side note, but I do. So you get in, you're now the chief.
Yep.
A couple questions about not necessarily the questions of the interview, but what what was your like what changes? What did you go in there saying these are the things I want to do differently or keep the same, or like what was your
Yeah.
thought process and how you were going to lead this department?
Yep. So number one is the integrity part.
Yep.
Not to say the few chiefs before me that were in here for a shorter time didn't have that integrity, but it was going to be different for me. I remember when I had our first department meeting after I became chief, immediately after I became chief, I had everybody in the room. And I said, obviously, you all know I was born and raised here. That means I know a lot of people. I said, and when you deal with people out there, they're going to bring me up. And they say, oh, I know the chief. And I said, I want you all to know, I want you to deal with them the way you would deal with anybody else. I said, don't let that influence you. I said, because I grew up here with that fear. It mattered who you dealt with. And again, I never changed what I did. I would take the heat, from the chief, but I didn't want that officers to feel that way. I didn't want them to feel, oh my God, I can't mess with this person. You do your job and do it just like you would for anybody else. And so that was, I think, the number one thing. The second thing is I wanted to strive for our department to get a good reputation and to be trusted, but to be that department that other departments looked at and say, yeah, they're squared away. That was really important for me. I wanted to be a squared away department. And so how do you do that? You have to look at who you have for resources here, who's your people, invest in them. And then you have to, really up your hiring standards as well. And that's really important for the people that you're bringing in to be able to attain that culture here. And I think we have done a decent job over I'd say, close to 20 years now with the people that we've hired, with what we've been able to do here. Like our budgets were very tight for years, but because we are very community oriented here, we're service driven, and we are very well supported by our community. The times when law enforcement nationally was not supported well at all, we were very supported here in this town. When the bad things would happen, we would get so many people reaching out to us, bringing us food, sending us cards, thanking us for what we do. That went a long way. We had one of the riots here after George Floyd. I won't say it's a riot. We had a rally here. So this was something, of course, going on across the country. I remember the organizers coming here and meeting with me and my command staff, and they said, yes, we are going to have this, say, protest here, but we're not protesting you and your department because we like how you police. So we're not going to cause any problems. What we were concerned about as an organization was any outside influences that were going to be coming in. So how we planned for that was, like, we had all of our officers front facing out there that were just in their uniforms and, traffic posts and stuff like that. Behind the scenes here, actually running our PD, we had a PD full of officers in gear ready to go if needed, right? Never seen by the public. Didn't need to be seen, but yet they were there if needed.
Yeah.
And that whole protest thing went extremely well. They marched. In fact, our Main Street is beautiful. We have a lot of beautiful flowers that line Main Street during our summer months. My biggest ask for them was, when you march, please don't trample the flowers.
Please and
They
thank
didn't.
you.
There were
Good.
hundreds, if not 1,000 people that marched here, never touched any of the flowers. You can't get any better than that, right?
No.
So we were pleased, but that's the type of support that we have gotten here in this community, which we maintain today because of the relationships that we have, what we've done, what we've built here with our, that has come back to us, as I said, through budget, because I say we have a very good training budget for our officers, the equipment we have. We have really good equipment here. But when I started here, if our cruisers, they hardly ran, right?
Yeah.
I remember the car chase once, and my siren was like on and off, rotating lights that we had back, the mechanical lights, you could hear them, the gears grinding on those things. Holes in the floorboards of the cruisers, right? But much different nowadays.
Yeah. Easier to clean. Mo, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question and a comment. I was listening to you talk about the protesters taking the time to come and meet with you, I don't think that that's something that people that I would say, this is my humble opinion, would be attributed to, oh, this is just a small town, that's why they did that. I feel like it's because of the reputation that you had begun to build at that point, that they would want to have that time to sit down and talk to you and explain what their stance was, and then make sure you understood it. It's not about you. Volumes, in my opinion. I just think, especially from where you said that the agency kind of had a bit of a black eye, to see it have that kind of traction to move that way, that's commendable to you for sure.
I appreciate that. But I also say, it's the culture that's been built here, right? With all our officers, they're warm and friendly. At the same time, they are prepared to turn on a dime if need be. But that's what I like. That's what I like to have. I like to have that image, but yet they can turn when and if they need to. Even with recently, we had the No Kings rally here on Saturday. Prior to, you had the organizer of the event reach out to me and said, we're not going to have any issues here. Please, here's my contact information. You let me know if we have any issues. And, we had, I would say, 600 to 700 people lining our stretch of Main Street here. No issues. Zero.
And I think that goes to also, like, what a unique way to police. Because it is a policing strategy to say, we're prepared behind the scenes, where you said the public never even saw the riot squads, and you just had your forward-facing people out there directing traffic, doing what would be community-oriented. That's just a really unique perspective to take on a situation like that. I think often law enforcement and law enforcement leaders want to meet force with force.
Yes.
And they're like, let's out there, let's have that show of force, and sometimes that's not always the best way to tackle it.
That's true. Absolutely. I was here for the ACT UP issues that were going around across the country when HW was in office, and we were advised that ACT UP was going to be coming and that we need to be prepared, that they were going to be, back then we didn't have body worn cameras or anything like that, but they said they're going to be videotaping us, they're going to be spitting on us, they're going to throw fake blood at us, yada yada yada. And yeah, we had state police down here, we had mutual aid from everywhere, and there was many of us in riot gear. We didn't have, there was no, I think there was a couple of arrests in Kennebunk Port, but nothing here. And for the most part, it really was pretty good with a lot. They were busing people in here from all over, but that went certainly, I think, as well as it could have. But I agree, when you can build those relationships with the people that they don't want to cause problems, and we certainly don't want problems. We want to work with them for the best solution. That's worked very well for us.
No,
I think
absolutely.
from knowing your community and your community trusting you. So
Yes.
that kind of leads into my question that I have for you, because you indicated growing up there, a lot of people on the civilian side of the world, and you also obviously moved through the department. So you knew all the individuals that were working under you. How difficult was that to maneuver that movement from being the patrol deputy to now being the chief of police? And you probably got people you used to, we call it 56 in, but meet up with and shop with.
Yep. Right.
And now you're supervising them.
Yeah, no, I think honestly what helped me a lot was the credibility that I was given when I stood up for my values, right? I think that gained me a lot of respect from our folks. As time went on, obviously we had a lot of transition here with people leaving, and that just seemed to continue through, though. I think the style I lead, I don't, you hear about the open door policy, right? I mean, my door is literally always open. I absolutely love to speak with our officers here, and I want to hear from them. I want to hear ideas, because I've said this all along, just because I've been in law enforcement as long as I have, just because I've been chief for 17 years, doesn't mean I have all the answers. I don't. I certainly don't. And I want to hear from others, because I felt as a young officer, I had good ideas, but no, who would listen to me back then? I want to hear. And so I think that really does help a lot. And especially in today's world with getting officers, right? It's difficult nationally to get officers. It's very different. When I applied here, again, think about it, Maine, small community. When I applied for that full-time position, we did have 100 other applicants just for that one position. Now we put a job posting out. You're lucky if you get 1 or 2 applications a month, and most of them are not, they're no experience, not great candidates, right? So
Yeah.
it's important now I think, to hear what the people that you have hired have to say, and try to make it so they feel included, involved, and heard here, because the type of policing, the way it used to be here as a chief, you did what I say. Be lucky you have a job. Those days are long gone.
Yeah, very true. Sir, I have a few questions. I just kind of want to rapid fire. I want to be respectful of your time. Hopefully you got a few more minutes because you brought it up a couple times, but I'll do one and then we'll go on to the next one. So, and I've tried to explain this to other agencies, but working in Maine, the multi-agency working agreements, I never experienced an issue, and maybe you can elaborate if there was one. Every department works together. I mean, I've done search warrants, arrest warrants where there's 15 different federal, state, local, whatever you want to call it. I never had an issue. I know that that's not true in a lot of other states, and like Massachusetts is a big one. Connecticut is another one, a few others, but they don't like working together in other areas. What do you think is different about Maine? And maybe if you know of, hey, there's a couple departments that are not fun to work with, that's fine. But just in general, I've never seen an issue. Do you agree? Yep. And why would that be?
Absolutely. You know, I will say even here in Maine, like I have had problems with, I won't say problems. I've had differences with another chief only because some time ago, a lot of their officers came here. They wanted to work for our department. It wasn't like we were out there, hey, come on over here. They just didn't like what was going on there. They wanted to come here, which caused a little riff, right? And I understand that. But at the same time, anything happens in their community, we're there. Vice versa. Yeah. Same here. That there's no problem there. And I think because it is a small state, because when we have trainings, a lot of these trainings, we are seeing those same officers and those chiefs. We have our chiefs meetings. We still work together. In fact, we are just building a county-wide team right now. I know Kevin Rooney was on your podcast not too long ago. He's one of those officers from our department that's going to be on that team. And that team is made up of many different departments throughout York County that, you know, if we have pre-planned events or concerns that are coming up, this team is activated. So it's kind of like almost like a SWAT team, but this could be for anything. You know, you have intersection takeovers. We've had some of them. If we get intelligence prior to, we can start that team and have them working. Great interagency, you know, working together with the different agencies, building those relationships. And that's what I look where we need to be now. We need to work better together with other departments because of the problems that we have with recruitment and retention. You know, most of our agencies here in Maine are short staffed like they are across the country. We are still asked to do more and more. We need to think outside the box and come up with ideas. And this is one of those ideas where it's going to have some very tangible benefits for us as a county and a state. But those relationships that we're building is perfect.
Perfect. And you brought up training and your training budget, because I know one being former law enforcement, or well, local and state, and talking with a lot of other cops, training is a big one. And it's multi-pronged. Either A, they never have time to do it, the agency doesn't give them time to do it, or they just don't want to because they've been on the road for 20 years and they don't care anymore. Numerous issues. I'm not saying it's all one thing or not the other, but how important is training and how do you push that for your department?
So that's a great question. So when I meet with new candidates, whether they're green in law enforcement or they're coming from another agency, I have a conversation with them as I'm doing the final offer with them to bring them on board. And I talk to them about training. I talk to them about, you're going to find your sweet spot here at some point. You're going to find the passions. And what I want you to do is I want you to be vocal about those passions and what you like to do and talk to your supervisor and kind of work towards those, and we will support you as long as it fits in somehow to our agency's needs and that it's attainable. Rooney, he's a great canine handler, right? That's a lot of training. That's continual training. I very much believe in that program. I want to see it succeed. I want him to succeed. I want our dog to have, and Kevin to have a great reputation, which he certainly has. Crash recon. That's not easy. That's not an easy school to go to. And we have an officer that does it. She is phenomenal at it. That's her sweet spot. After law enforcement, there's going to be a career for her, but that's what drives her. It's important for me to drive those officers into those positions they want to be because it's better. It's better for them. They feel supported, gives them a reason to want to stay here, but it also benefits our department, our community, and our state.
No, absolutely. Just on that same thread, because that's something that I experienced. You know, you develop these passions, you figure out what you either love traffic or you hate it, or you like going after whatever it is. And speaking of one of your detectives, Steve Borst, who I always thought I was a really good investigator until I talked to him, and I'm like, God, I still have a lot to learn. I don't know anything. But, you know, he's developing that kind of trust where you just let him kind of rock and roll and know that he's going to do a good job is rare. He gives you all the credit, by the way. Every time I talk to him, he's like, if I didn't have Bob as my chief, then he goes, I wouldn't be able to do half the cases I'm doing. But being able to identify that, and then I guess my question to you is, if you need to justify it, how do you justify that where he's doing like a global takedown, but it did impact the community, but how do you recognize that and support it?
Yeah. So the examples that I have, like with what he's affiliated with, the investigations that he has done has not only given him the training, but the connections.
Yeah.
Like we've had some recent fraud cases that have been national and one is international, right?
Yeah.
That Steve was part of putting that case together and seeing it through to fruition to an arrest. Right. And when we talk about somebody from Romania getting arrested, and we can put that out in a press release. Now that did affect us directly here because we did have a loss here, but that's huge. You know, that goes a long way again for the officer, for our community, and for our department and reputation as well. So
no, that's awesome. And Mo, I'm going to bring this up, but they, and I don't, Bob, I'm going to ask you to talk on it. They have a behavioral health unit, and how long has it been up? Because I don't remember knowing about it, and might just be my own ignorance. But two, mental health. We kind of talked about it before we started recording. How important is it to you and your agency, and then how do you overcome some of the hurdles we've talked about before?
So I love this subject because I wish we had our liaisons for decades. You know, as a young officer, I was pretty proactive. I used to make a lot of arrests out there, and I saw back then that what we were doing wasn't going to solve much, taking people to jail without any intervention and whatnot. So it was pre-COVID, a few years before COVID hit, I was doing a lot of work around the recovery, people with substance use disorder, and looking to destigmatize that and get people into recovery rather than just arresting them, holding them still accountable, but getting them the help that they needed. And so there was a local group here in the Kennebunks that liked what I was doing, and they asked me if they could fundraise. They wanted to do a couple of fundraisers over 2 years and support my efforts. I said, yeah, absolutely. And they did it. And over 2 years, they raised like $112,000. And so like we did put on a couple of recovery coach classes, it's called. But one of the things that it was used to support was I could utilize it was an outside mental health. I won't say it's a company, but it's called Sweetser. And that's what they do. They deal with mental health. People, they have social workers, and it's almost statewide. I contracted with them.
I've worked with them on the juvenile side.
Okay. Contracted them to have an LCSW come in and do ride-alongs with our officers. Now, I knew this was not going to be popular amongst officers. I've been there. I know how it is when when they say you're going to have somebody riding with you. A, that sucks.
Yeah.
B, all right, I'm
not another cop. Yeah.
You're going to have a social worker riding with me? Touchy feely? That's not me, right? But the officers did it. Then COVID hit. And then we couldn't have anybody ride with us.
Yeah.
So we just used them to do kind of follow up with folks. But then as we were getting out of COVID, then I started part-time. I actually contracted through Sweetser to have a part-time 20-hour-a-week behavioral health liaison, again, that could co-respond with us, but also more importantly, help do follow-up. Because that's something that the way I would look at it is how it is. You get these disturbance calls and you go, and it's whether substance abuse related or mental health related, but you don't have enough to take anybody in for a charge, or you don't have enough to put somebody in protective custody. Well, you leave there and you say, we're going to be back, right?
Yep.
And how many times are you going to come back? Is it going to escalate each time? Because those calls can escalate. And so having the social worker, behavioral health liaison, be able to do follow up and work with these people and try to connect them to the resources, I thought was a really good answer for us. And it worked well. And I will say the officers came around to the point where at one point, when you see the eyes roll to hear that they're going to come in and ride with you, to the next day when liaison was out of the office and we get a mental health call come in, and the officer, their office is right next to mine. The officer would come up and say, is Rachel here? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, so it's like definitely a culture shift here. And so now we have 1.5 full-time behavioral health liaisons. So 60 hours a week. Do provide Kennebunk Port some of those hours so that they can have, we can help them out. So they are vital to us. And like, I think truly our calls to service, although have probably gone up because we've seen, I think nationally, it's probably safe to say nationally, we've seen like a mental health crisis, right? But I know the work these folks have done in getting people into services and making sure they stay in those services. We haven't had any major events with anybody, which I think attributes all to the work that they have done. So there's many departments now here in Southern Maine that are doing that. York County specifically, many departments either work together and have a behavioral health liaison or two. Some have a unit that's specifically for mental health, which is great. That's really where we need to be, because there's so much of it out there, and they truly have an impact with people.
So this was something you generated, like you pushed, I guess?
I remember Portland PD had a model similar to this for many years. They had their own unit, but there were no small departments that had this. But because of the work that I was doing in recovery, and again, when you're arresting people on criminal charges, most likely substances are involved in that, right? One way or the other. And you need to address the root cause, because otherwise it's that revolving door of the jail. And so I really felt the need to do something there. And this was the best way to effectively do that. So it's really become popular.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Mo.
It's interesting too, like you pointed out, the thing that people a lot of times don't think about is what's not tangible, what you can't measure with. Yeah, you have more calls for service, but how many of those haven't escalated? That's not something that we can necessarily put a number on.
Exactly.
But to me, that's the end all be all goal on that. So I have a question. You said earlier, giving these people help while still holding them accountable. Did you have to get with the court system and work with them in order to get them on board with your idea of incorporating this piece into the puzzle?
Yeah, I first did it with juveniles because I do believe in restorative justice practices quite a bit. And so we did that with juveniles, and I got the court on board with that. And that's been very effective. It's been it was a little bit more challenging with through the adult process, but the courts now they see that, they recognize that. We do a drug court now in Maine as well, which has helped quite a bit. But they are very willing to work with us. I mean, it takes a load off of them. And we know they're trying to, they are just so overwhelmed. They're looking for that type of help.
No, for sure. And I remember being a street cop, and there's only so much you can get trained on and FTO'd on, and there's so many issues that you come across. I, throughout time and experience and talking to other deputies, would learn about resources for homeless people, drug addiction, domestic violence, and that has nothing to do with cops or the courts, but just other services. But it's not something I just readily knew. And like you're talking about, you're going to these same places over and over again. You're like, oh my God, like this is not a cop thing. Like, can somebody else figure this out? You know what I mean? So I understand it. And I'll throw this out there. It kind of depends on where you're at. But in my travels, I was in Seattle. They have a drug problem there and a homeless problem, for those who don't know. But what I saw was they were trying to bridge the gap between cops and the homeless and the drug addicts, I guess. I'll phrase it that way. And they had a volunteer service that every morning, because businesses were complaining and calling the cops because the homeless folks would, bed down in front of their stores, like right in the doorway or whatever, all around the building. And the business owners were getting into these altercations. They didn't want to deal with it, so they called the cops. And it was just leading to this problem. So they created this volunteer service where these volunteers would come around in these carts, and they'd have coffee and blankets, and they'd say, hey, do you need a ride to a shelter? Whatever. But it was basically, they'd come around at like 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, and they'd basically rouse them in a non-confrontational, non-law enforcement way to move them along. And, that seemed to work from the moments that I saw it being utilized. Sure. And then obviously if it escalated or something got wild, they called the cops, but it tamped down the calls for service, and it helped kind of mediate any issues between local business owners and the homeless population that Seattle has. I know that doesn't necessarily apply everywhere across the board, but again, just trying to think through these things and try to get some other alternative source other than, because cops, we got handcuffs and a gun, right? Like that's what we're there to do. All this other stuff is really, I know we get trained on it and all that stuff, but it's really not in the scope of what they're trying to do. And it can cause problems.
Right. Absolutely right.
I'm a big fan. I didn't realize you guys were doing it. I love it.
Me too. I wish, that's 30 years ago.
Well, as with most things, a little behind the times sometimes, but there's only so much we could do. Couple other things, just because you're in a unique position and answer it. I don't know how to frame the question, but you brought up the select committee. Because so I've never worked for a municipality. I've only been a sheriff deputy and a state trooper. So it's a different structure, especially for chiefs. And I've obviously never been a supervisor. What type of relationship how would you describe that relationship, and how do you give and take on running a police department and working with local community leaders? I try not to make it very political, and I don't necessarily think law enforcement should matter that way, but what is that relationship like, and how does it impact each other? Yeah. How do you both impact each other?
Sure thing. So like I said, it's changed a lot from when I first started here. It's very different.
Yeah.
The way it's supposed to work is my boss is our town manager, and then his bosses are our select board, which now is a select board of 7 who are elected officials from our community. And so my boss, Brian, he's I say the buffer. When they have issues related to police, or to go through him that then get to me, and I funnel back to him, and he sends it out to them. But at the same time, certainly we do work with those folks. Like we have our Citizens Police Academy that we hold here. We always offer a spot for any of the select board members, so they have an opportunity to see what we are dealing with, what we have, and what our needs are. Yeah. We did our 5-year strategic plan the end of last year. I did a presentation at our select board meeting, so they all had an opportunity to see what our 5-year plan is, our strategic plan, what our wants and needs and are for our department and the community. So having that relationship is vital. Having them informed is very vital, because as you know, when you're in these offices and you have the decision maker and you hold basically the checkbook, right? If you're not informed with what your police department is, where it's at and what it needs, you're making these decisions that are going to impact that department. So I think it's very vital for departments to include, obviously, these folks so they understand, have that true meaning of what we're dealing with. So when we're up there at budget time asking for money, and this is why they have a better understanding why that is. So it's very vital.
No, that's excellent. Because I know I've had these conversations. One thing about being in the Secret Service is you get to hear behind the scenes, the political stuff.
Yes.
Again, there's a lot more to running a city or a town or whatever that goes beyond law enforcement and the services that they require, the equipment they need, the money they need. But it's like, you got to understand, and this is things that I've heard, law enforcement, we're there to protect the business owners because they drive business. We're there to protect the residents who live there day in and day out. And we're there to protect the tourists who will help generate some of those revenue dollars. And it all kind of goes in. But I think a lot of times that gets lost. And they're like, why do you need this? Why do you need another, whatever, $100,000 to buy cars? Or why do you need this new body? Whatever it is. And you're like, we're trying to do our job in the best way possible. If you start taking these things away.
But I also see what it's like when that trust is not there between those elected officials and the chief of police. I've seen days where we were not supported. Our chief was not supported to where we are now. We do have the support of our community and our elected leaders. So it's nice. It's a nice, nice feeling.
Yeah, I was going to say on that note, I think sometimes law enforcement leaders forget, though, that we do need that support, and they don't necessarily trickle it down all the way to the people who are doing the job too, to remind them that, we are that community policing. We are the face of, law enforcement, but also a lot of times people look at us as the face of the government arm, essentially. Yeah, right. And people don't think about, when we're going to go and we're going to ask for things, we do have to have the support of the community and those governing boards. Because even working at, I worked at a sheriff's office, we had county commissioners, which sound very similar to your select committee. So it's the same relative situation. And if you are not making sure that your people are educated on that, then they're not going to go out there and do this job either. That's to get that support from the community.
Spot on.
Yeah. And this is where I kind of bust balls with firefighters. I'm like, they need a $400,000 fire truck. It's like, yeah, of course they need it. I'm like, bro, how many fires are we? Anyway,
we digress. I know
a little bit. I digress a little bit.
Everybody loves
what I'm saying.
That's why.
They all do.
That's right.
Two more questions if you've got the time, sir. And again, I don't know the unions because I've never been in one, and I've never had to work with a union, but I know it's a very big thing in Maine, and especially local law enforcement. Help me phrase this properly, but because you're the chief, I'm assuming you're not in the union, but you have to negotiate with the union. And what does that look like? So
very different again from when I started here, because I was part of the union as a patrol officer. I won't say it's a very strong union at the time, but nonetheless. And then as time went on, and I think I was a sergeant at the time, I stepped up to be the union steward for the supervisors. Not that I wanted to do it, but I felt I would do it so I could see that side of things, right? And I'm glad I did it, because obviously now being on the other side, I kind of have a clearer picture. The unions, I say, has changed over the years. Now, I will say they asked for a lot more. Like I went probably 15 years without a single grievance from our union, where the last couple of years, I've had a few grievances, and what I would say were not big grievances, but I think it's just a sign of the times with where we are with people. They want, they have these expectations, and they will pick I say the contract, they're going to pick it apart where years gone by, it was kind of give and take. We give each other some room, more wiggle room now. And that's not so much there anymore. At the same time, I see legitimacy of where they're coming from as well. You know, I sometimes will come out on the side, yep, I truly support, you know, this grievance. Let's come up with a remedy for it. And there'll be one or two more that I haven't totally agreed with, and it goes beyond me to my boss. Yeah, it's been interesting seeing a shift, I think, in the change for the union. It makes me probably be a little bit more detailed now when I do things, right? I have to think, could I get a grievance out of this?
Got it.
So it isn't like we have a lot of grievances. Believe me, we don't. But there's probably been it's probably been a handful of them in the last couple of years where I just never would get any beforehand.
Got it. And then my last question, Mo, if you have any, but body cameras, because I started and it sounds like so did you, obviously. I started my career before body cameras, and I left local law enforcement before they came in.
Yep.
I've used them on the federal side for investigation stuff, but I've heard mixed reviews from street cops about body cameras, but I've never actually talked to a chief because one, it's the body cameras in general, the costs associated with it, and then also the cost to store that stuff. Yes. Your overall opinion on body cameras in law enforcement.
So I think I was a patrol officer when we first got our dash cameras, right? Yep. And I remember how that felt, as an officer in getting dash cameras. But yeah, I did look at it as a tool that if you're out there doing the right thing, there's no reason to be concerned with anything. Yeah. And so I really liked having them. And there were times when I say that dash camera would save me, and when the body cameras, I'm not going to say we're the first department in Maine to have them, but we're at the top. I really do believe in the body worn cameras because it's going to help officers much more than it's going to hurt officers. And I say again, if you're not doing anything out there you shouldn't be doing, right? There's no reason to be concerned about it. But yeah, we've had one issue when we hadn't had the body cameras all that long. We mutual aid to the next town over where they have what was considered a biker bar, and our officers were there before the sheriff's department, and we had to go hands on and take the guy down and effect the arrest of him. And he filed notice of claim to us because he hurt his knee when he went down. Uh-huh. Once he saw the video footage, never went any further, right? And we've had other instances where people have made complaints against officers, and we watch the body cam footage and say, take a look at this. So it's helped those officers. I can't say there's been a time when we've used those body cameras for the negative against an officer, right? And I think the officers know here, if they do something wrong, they're going to be held accountable, right? And the body cam is going to help them more than anything else. And I also think it does help with our criminal cases as well. It's just, it records that evidence that we're seeing. I
will say using them on like search warrants and stuff, it's a lot easier because you just refer back to the record. You don't have to remember everything. You just refer to your recorded data.
Can I bring up a case I was involved with? It wasn't a body camera.
No, please.
Oh my God, this is.
Yeah.
So I've always been a jokester here, right? And as I became promoted every time, especially as chief, my first go-to is when I hear something, see something, I want to say something kind of funny, but I'm like, could this get me fired? Usually the answer is yes, so I can't say it. So you must remember the big Zumba case that we had here.
Yep.
Okay.
Mo doesn't know.
No.
I do. Go ahead. Tell Mo. Yeah, Mo doesn't know this one.
Yeah. So we had complaints of cars coming and going to this Zumba studio. It was believed that it was prostitution going on there. And this is Kennebunk, Maine. Bush's backyard is what I saw, in some news release. We ended up having to investigate it, and we ended up doing these search warrants. And it literally, when we started arresting people, it went international. Because every week, with the help of the Maine State Police, it's so much evidence that it had to go to their crime unit. I mean, they had to sift through tons of computer stuff, doing all these forensics. And so on a weekly basis, we'd print out this arrest log of who we were charging for prostitution. It was big because who's the locals that got arrested? It was the chief on the list. Somebody called me, heard I was on the list, and I got terminated. It's like, no, not on that list. But while we were doing the investigation, when we were going to conduct a search warrant on the property, we found as we were conducting this evidence, we found some evidence. And this evidence was related to the type of crimes we were investigating, if you can catch my drift. And of course, me being the jokester, now we have Maine drug enforcement there. There was probably 4 of our officers there, and I forget who else. And when we open up this box, I'm like, my God. And it was like, no, needless to say, we collected what we needed to for evidence, but there was a lot of computer equipment there as well as a video camera. Never thought a thing about it until Maine State Police was doing their thing, and they let us know that while we were conducting our search warrant, we were being recorded to the guy that would, I don't know if you want to call him a pimp, but in the mid-coast, he had all this recorded. He had all this information. And of course, he got this high-profile attorney here in Maine. His name was Dan Lilly, since deceased. But this guy was, he's going to make anything public. And when I found out that they had all this recording, I'm like, what did I say? What did I do? I'm like, I'm ready to turn my badge in. I'm like, because I'm a joke. And I called the DA's office. I'm like, you got to come down here and have an ADA go and screen. And I remember the day they were here next to my office in a closed door, and they reviewed probably 2 hours worth of video. And it was like, am I going to get fired? And she came out, she said, you guys were great. I was like, what? You guys were so professional. I'm like, oh my God. Cause I'm thinking, what did I forget? Because I know I did something stupid, and this is going to be all open news. In fact, when the story broke, I was in Arizona. My wife had an office out there, and I went in and rode with the guys from in Arizona. And then I picked my wife up for dinner, and we went to dinner. I knew the news was breaking that night, and so I still had my Kennebunk Police Department shirt on like this, and we're at this restaurant, and the waiter came over and said, "Can I get you guys a drink?" And he does a double take at he went, "Are you with Kennebunk Police?" I said, "I am." He said, "You guys are all over the news." And this is in Arizona. No. We made the Jay Leno monologue that night. Yeah.
My gosh. Yeah.
So that was big to-dos here. You got to check it out. Just go online, look Zuma Kennebunk, and
that's phenomenal.
My God. When you had CNN.
That's phenomenal on a lot of levels, because to know that your chief has a sense of humor, you're like, okay, I'm not alone.
I was surprised I didn't say something stupid or, just a joke. Those things, what you have to keep in mind because of today's with your body worn cameras, and how do we relieve stress?
We make jokes about it.
Right. And we say things that if the general public heard, they'd be disgusted, but they don't understand that's a coping mechanism for us, right? Yep. So that could be the bad side of body cameras. And that's why when you come up to a scene, our officers do it. I know officers do it. You come up to a scene, and I get called out in the middle of the night, and they'll say, camera.
Yep.
It's like, oh yeah.
Let them know.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
They'll say anything.
Well, you said you had CNN parked out front, and I just was talking to Michelle Kepford. She took over principal for Stoneman Douglas the year after the shooting happened down there in Parkland. And now she's doing press conferences that are nationwide and probably really worldwide, because it was such a target incident or a highly visible incident. Assuming, and maybe incorrectly, did you have training in public speaking or press conferences? Because now here you are the chief, you've got to give them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was part of the supervision class that I've been to. They actually put you in front of a camera, and then they had people from the media there that would ask you questions, just like it was role playing, right? But I would say that was very valuable. But what I have found for me as a leader, somebody that there's a good chance you're going to have to go in front of the media at some point, right? Is the more exposure you can have to the media, the better you are. And there's a number of reasons behind that. Number one, you do build relationships with your folks, right? But more importantly is you get more comfortable. The more you do it, the more you are. Like I'm a fan of using the media to my advantage, because they want to hear from you right when the shit hits the fan.
Yeah.
But I use them when we're doing the good stuff out here. I want to get that good exposure. And so I will call them up, say, hey, this is what we're doing. Like probably 2 months ago, myself and a guy from the Maine Army National Guard counter drug unit went up and did a interview right at their station. It was a sit down interview where they asked us questions about this prevention program that we're doing now. And what was funny is the reporter that was doing it had me meet the general manager of the news station. And when I met them, I was talking, this was before the interview, they said, my God, have you been on camera before? I said, yeah. They said, you're very calm, because usually people are really stressed out and nervous. I'm like, yeah, I've done it a few times. I think that is so beneficial for law enforcement leaders to do, because a lot of times we don't want to talk to the media, because you know what? It is unnerving, right?
Yes.
The more exposure you get to it, the better you are. You understand these are just people, and you need to control that interview. You have to control what questions you're going to answer and what you're not going to answer, and when to shut that interview down. So I had a good PIO at the time. We went through the Zoomer guy, and he was the one that would directly speak with the media. He did a great job. But since then, certainly I've done a lot, I haven't had, like when we had the Lewiston mass shooting up here.
Yeah.
We just had a debrief on that for the Maine State Police, and they talked about that. Shannon Moss, who used to work for a local news station, she's the state's PIO, and she presented on that, talked about that, and how different it is from the local media when you have the national media, and how you really have to control those the national folks, because they're going to be bullies. They're going to get.
Oh yeah.
Want that information. So.
I will say, Secret Service, we have what's called press agents. So you embed with the press because you want to control them.
Yes.
Well, control them in the sense that they can't rush the stage or not be somewhere they're not supposed to be.
Right.
Let me just clarify that before I get in trouble. But I will say, going overseas, I have physically had to grab journalists and stuff, and because they're trying to bum rush the president or the vice president, you're having to like physically grab them and say, no, you can't just bum rush them because you want to get a close-up shot in their face. It is very different. It's like they just don't understand what's going on. It's wild, but I can only imagine. Mo, I'm sorry, we got a couple minutes left, but I don't want to.
No, I mean, super interesting to hear your perspective as a chief, and kind of like I said earlier, to realize the things that you're constantly juggling, but also that you have a human side too. You're making jumps on search warrants just like us as deputies. And it's nice to hear, because I think, in relation to like the body cameras, as a deputy, I didn't have them, but I remember initially I was like, because my first thought was, if I'm out joking on a call, or if I say something or yell at somebody, how is my upper going to handle that? Am I going to get fired? Am I going to get reprimanded? Right. So it's nice to hear that personal side of it. And then, like I said, I'm super impressed with the pulse of the community that you seem to have, and know what your community needs, whether it's the riot situations or just the everyday. How you talk about troops is very, very interesting. And I don't think it's something that's limited to the size of your agency. Again, like I said earlier, I think that it's something that could be utilized wherever you were, just a matter of getting out there and taking the time. So thank you for your time.
Certainly.
Absolutely. Bob, anything you want to leave with? I appreciate you, brother.
No, certainly. Thank you. I appreciate this. This is great. So, I'm very fortunate again to have a great team of people here. It's the officers, right, that make up the department. I just get to lead them all, and I'm proud of them and what they do. I like to see what we're doing. I like to be able to have influence on our community, hopefully even outside of that community. It's been a hell of a career. I've told my kids, if I die, know that I'm happy. I feel fulfilled, that I've had a fun career. It's never been a job.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Anytime.
Bob,